Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annie Wang. I'm the Publicity Coordinator for Southern Alberta IT, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we start, I would like to have everyone make sure you are on mute during the presentation. Please type into the chat function if you have any questions or comments, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce our speakers today, who will be speaking on the topic of regional transportation planning. First, we have Stephen Powers. He is the Senior Transportation Planner and Engineer with HDR. He has over 30 years of experience in transportation and environmental planning. This gives him a strong understanding of the regional issues with experience in regional and intermunicipal transportation and environmental planning across Canada, and as well as internationally in New Zealand and Australia. He is currently leading the Edmonton Metropolitan Region's Integrated Regional Transportation Master Plan, and recently completed the Central Okanagan's first regional transportation plan. He is a very skilled communicator with an ability to make technical topics easily understood. Some of his recently managed complex multi-municipal transportation planning projects include the Central Okanagan Planning Study, the Airfoot Trail Study, and the ongoing Calgary Metropolitan Region Growth and Servicing Plan. We also have Lynn Machacek with us today. Lynn is a transportation engineer and planner also with HDR. He has a broad experience in multimodal transportation engineering, analysis, planning, engagement, and goods movement. He is very passionate about creating great places and travel options for people, and has been the lead transportation planner on regional transportation planning projects, goods movement studies, and large-scale multimodal microsimulation analysis. His work has included in-depth stakeholder consultation for network and regional planning studies, the identification and analysis of multimodal issues and solutions at various scales, and the development of evaluation and prioritization methodologies for regional transportation planning projects. Now, please join me in welcoming Stephen and Lynn.
All right. Hi, Annie. Thank you for the great introduction. Now I'll start with our presentation. Okay, so yeah, as Annie said, Stephen and I will be giving a presentation today. The topic is approaches to regional transportation planning, lessons learned from Western Canada and beyond. So Stephen and I have had the opportunity of working on a number of regional transportation plans over the past couple of years, and we'd like to share our experience on those with you.
Lynn, for some reason, I'm not seeing your slides, Lynn, so you might want to just try reshare your screen.
All right, let's try again here. All right, are you able to see that now, Steve?
And nope, not seeing anything now.
Okay, how about, it says just waiting, how about
there
now?
We go. There we go, we got it.
Okay, great. So here's an outline of the presentation today. I'll first provide a little introduction to regional transportation planning, and then go over some examples of other regional plans in North America. This will include a combination of projects that we researched doing best practice studies, and also projects that are either completed or ongoing by HDR. And then we'll focus in on one of our recently completed projects, the Central Okanagan Regional Transportation Planning Study. So first, why regional transportation planning? And the reason is most of us, at least in North America, now live in cities, but also regions. And what once used to be distinct separate towns and cities have since grown into each other. However, the political and planning structures of these municipalities have generally not merged together, leaving us with metropolitan regions that are now made up of many distinct separate entities. In Canada, our major cities are actually metropolitan regions, and while we may call them by their short names, such as Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, these cities are actually more accurately described as the regional entities, and they have generally grown into the other municipalities around them. And from a citizen's perspective, such as walking or driving through them, it can be really difficult to tell where one starts and the other begins. And because of the different growth rates and contexts of these regions, they all have different political and planning structures. Some regions have regional transportation and transit agencies, while in others, like Calgary, the regional service is often led by the main central city. And in many cases, higher order levels of government are often an important partner at the table because regional planning really comes in between municipal planning and provincial planning work. So here's a quote from the book The Regional City by Peter Calthorpe and William Fulton. And it suggests that there is potential for regional cities to improve our lives. And in order to harness that, we really need to plan consciously from a regional perspective to bridge the gap between these different jurisdictions. And that's where regional transportation planning comes in. So in order to handle the increased size, complexity, and overlap of these cities and regions, most regions now undertake regional planning efforts to plan and cooperate across municipal boundaries, generally with the goal of improving the lives of regional residents, not just residents of your own specific municipality. The term regional transportation planning can include a number of different things, such as aligning local transportation plans and priorities, developing a shared vision and goals, creating mechanisms to advocate for or allocate funding, conducting detailed and long-range analysis to understand future risks and opportunities, and building partnerships between different jurisdictions and orders of government. Now, many of you may be more familiar with municipal-based transportation master plans than regional plans, and we have found that there are a couple general distinctions between the different types of planning exercises. The first we found is that regional TMPs are often more unique from one another, and that's based on the unique nature of each region and their current governance. So while transportation master plans or TMPs are often made up of similar components, such as network plans for each mode of transportation, and then this is supported by a capital project list and implementation plan, we found that regional TMPs are often more oriented around the specific issues that a region is currently facing, and then the resulting studies and plans are focused on addressing those issues. We've also found that regional TMPs are much more closely tied to regional aspirations and goals, so they can be a bit more high level and visional. And then finally, we found that the types of transportation analysis and modeling conducted for regional TMPs is also quite different than for municipal-based TMPs. As the municipal-based TMPs typically define the specific network requirements and plans, this enables regional TMPs to be conducted at a more strategic level to kind of cover any gaps in the planning processes and be that link between municipal TMP planning processes and the province or higher order level of government. Now, to support some of our projects, we've conducted research and best practice reviews to learn what other metropolitan areas around the world are doing. And we brought some of those lessons home, so to speak, and have applied them to our recent projects. In this section, I'll go over some of the best practices that we found and describe some of the processes that we're currently using on our studies. So some of the studies that I'll go over include the Metropolitan Regional Transportation Plan, the Southeast Florida Climate Change Regional Compact, the Denver Mobility Choice Blueprint, the Greater Golden Horseshoe Transportation Plan, and the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Integrated Regional Transportation Master Plan. The Metro Portland Regional Transportation Plan is led by Metro, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Portland side of the Portland-Vancouver region in Oregon. The region currently has a population of 1.5 million people spread over 24 municipalities and a projected future 2040 population of 2 million people. So the key interest areas of this planning study were transportation equity, road design, and the equitable implementation of emerging technologies. And some of the interesting things that stood out to us about this planning exercise was that it was focused first on identifying the challenges to achieving the regional goals. And then the projects within the plan were selected by finding out which ones would best address those goals. And now that the plan is in the implementation phase, regional partners and municipalities are able to submit projects for consideration for funding by the region, but the region will evaluate those and provide funding based on how closely the project is aligned with the regional goals. So it's a very, very direct relationship between the goals and the resulting projects and funding. The plan also included policies to prioritize racial and transportation equity, both through the plan itself, but also through the subsequent decision-making processes. So they tried to understand regional transportation-related disparities and barriers faced by communities of color and other historically marginalized communities. And an example of this is that the plan analyzed fatal and severe collisions, and this enabled them to focus their safety interventions and improvement projects on the areas where collisions were more likely to occur. And then they were able to overlay these high injury collision locations and corridors with regional census data. And this allowed them to implement policies and actions that focused on the communities that were most affected by these collisions. And one of the findings was that in Greater Portland, the majority of deaths and severe injuries occurred in areas with either high concentrations of people of color, people with lower incomes, or people who are currently learning English. And then the third takeaway is that the plan took a unique approach to transportation modeling, and that they, instead of traditionally assessing the roadways based on existing capacity constraints and levels of congestion, they took a more high-level perspective and looked at network connectivity, local geographic contexts, the relationship between existing communities and future development, and the protection of natural environments. So through taking a more holistic approach to the transportation network analysis process, my understanding is that they did this to better relate the ultimate improvement projects that they identified with the goals identified for the plan. The next plan that I'll go over is the Southeast Florida Climate Change Regional Compact. So this isn't actually a regional transportation plan, it's a climate change plan, but I think it's a good example of not only regional collaboration, but also on how a plan can be implemented. The compact is a partnership between a number of counties in Southeast Florida surrounding the Miami region, and their stated mission is to collaboratively reduce greenhouse gas emissions, implement climate change adaptation strategies, and build climate resilience. So the Climate Action Plan provides policy, a set of recommendations, guidelines for implementation, and shared best practices that local entities can follow so that they're able to easily act in line with the regional vision. And what stood out for me for this plan was how it was implemented, and specifically the website that was provided. So on the main page of the website, you're able to identify what type of plan user you are and what type of industry you work in. And from there, the website filters through all of the plan's policy and shows you only the policy that it believes you'll be interested in. So for example, I chose to be a municipal employee who works in transportation. And this information on the bottom right here showed up, which lists the specific policies that apply to transportation, even though it's a climate change plan. And when you click on one of the policies, such as this first one, it takes you to a separate page, which includes the specific policy. And in this case, it's make sure that you incorporate unified sea rise level projections into all planning projects, including transportation. And then it provides you a guide with how to specifically do that, which is a separate report. It also provides the sea level rise projections in PDF and GIS formats, and then some accompanying legal information. So this really provides a complete package that can make it very simple for someone to apply the policy to their individual municipality, which I think really makes the implementation of this plan really powerful. And one of the other things that they did was they've listed off all of the municipalities that are currently complying with this policy, And I think this provides a second layer of accountability so that anyone who's interested, if the municipality that they live in is complying with this plan, all they have to do is look up on the website and they can see if their city is compliant. So I think it's a really good example of how a plan can be implemented and monitored. The next project that I will go over is the Denver Mobility Choice Blueprint. This was a collaboration between a number of different entities in the Denver region. And through the plan, they were able to build alignment between these different levels of government and jurisdictions. The plan was focused on setting a practical approach to identifying and managing future uncertainty and change. And primarily they looked into what they called CASE, which is the Connected, Automated, Shared, and Electric Future. So one interesting thing about this plan was how they used something that I called the representative citizen to really conduct their study around and also to communicate the plan with the public. And here's an example of one of the representative citizens for the project. It says, meet Mariah. It describes her a little bit, such as, what are her current frustrations and travels experience with the current network, how, tech savvy she considers herself to be. It looks into what her trips are like on a daily basis. And then on the bottom right here, it describes what the plan will do for her. So in orange shows the business as usual future without any significant improvements. And the blue shows what the proposed plan, this policy, will do for Mariah's life, including how much time she'll save, what modes of transportation she may decide to take in the future, and what the results will be for her financially. So I think this is a good way to really bring the sometimes technical and hard to understand content of a large planning exercise like this to be really easily understood by the public and other stakeholders. Okay, and now moving on to the Greater Golden Horseshoe Plan, which HDR is currently working on. The Greater Golden Horseshoe stands, or also known as GGH, is the region surrounding Toronto. It's currently home to about 9 million people and 4.5 million jobs. And the GGH Transportation Plan is a long-range transportation plan for the region, and it's being led by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. The study is looking at the future horizon of 2051 and beyond. And the plan includes looking into how to best accommodate a growing population, address future mobility and congestion, guide infrastructure investment decisions, coordinate strategic network planning, and prepare for new technology. So some of the best practices that were incorporated into this plan included interviews with up to 20 different local and international experts on a range of different topics to get insights on what the future will be like over the next 50 years. The plan also looked at 5 different stretch future scenarios to understand the impact of different, emerging phenomenon and what the consequences would be on regional travel and transportation. And then we also conducted an extensive research into future trends, disruptors, and changes in technology, and tried to understand what their potential impacts would be. Disruptors that we looked at included automated and connected vehicles, the digitalization of the supply chain, small ports and shipping, near sourcing and manufacturing, and job automation. Stephen and I completed the job automation study, where we looked at the potential transportation impacts of job automation. And this included research into what the historical speed of job automation was, what industries it affected, and what people were forecasting would happen in the future. And what we found was that, the future implications of job automation on transportation were quite inconclusive and could significantly vary based on location and industry. The research does indicate that many repetitive, manual, and lower wage positions are likely to be automated first, but it's also unclear in whether this automation will result in a net loss of future jobs. And if it does, what the overall transportation impacts of those will be. One of our insights is that perhaps the traditional morning and evening commuting periods could become less pronounced as 9-to-5 jobs are lost. And this could especially be true for certain regions and certain areas and industries within these regions. I think it's interesting to note as well that we might be seeing a similar effect with the recent pandemic, where low-wage jobs have been lost at a faster rate than high-wage jobs, and commuting trends and other travel behaviors have changed significantly in some locations, but not very much at all in other locations. And the final plan I'll go over is the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Integrated Regional Transportation Master Plan. It's a wordful. We call it the EMR IRtmp. So the first EMR growth plan was made in 2010, and it restarted regional planning in the Edmonton region after it was discontinued in 1995. And IRtmp was created to support this growth plan. It's since been updated every 2 years, and among other things, it's used to develop an annual regional transportation priority list, which helps the different municipalities coordinate together and to advocate to the province for funding for these projects. The EMR is made up of 13 different member municipalities, and the study process is largely driven by the goals and vision of the growth plan. And some of the growth plan factors are listed on this page. Now, for this study, one of the main components of our work was conducting a scenario analysis to show the implications of different policy types and project types on the region and understand what impacts they would have. And I'll just go through those now. So the first scenario that we looked at was a business as usual scenario. We asked, what if we continue to seek to have free flow vehicle operations and travel conditions? So we expanded most major highways, added some new highways and arterials, and also expanded the LRT and regional bus network. And the results, not surprisingly, were that congestion definitely improved in the future horizon, and there was little congestion outside of the ring road, but still some congestion remained within the ring road. And then this scenario became the base with which we were going to measure all other scenarios against. For the delayed investment scenario, we asked the question, what if transportation investment is reduced in the near future? And so any projects that were originally slated to occur between 2030 and 2045, we assumed that they wouldn't happen by the 2045 planning horizon. What we found was that as a result of this, it resulted in a total increase in hours lost due to congestion of 30%. We also found impacts to trip reliability. The model often didn't want to converge. And we also found that traffic shifted from some of the major highway routes to more local arterial and connector streets, and trips got shorter but took longer. The next scenario that we looked at was the effect of higher order transit on the region. And to do this, we added several transit extensions, including extensions to St. Albert, Fort Saskatchewan, the airport, and Leduc, and also a new route to Spruce Grove from Edmonton. In addition to this, we also increased transit frequencies to have a minimum of 15-minute headways. And the result of this was that transit ridership significantly increased on these new routes, but the overall region-wide mode shift didn't actually budge that much. With a business as usual mode shift of transit mode share of approximately 9%, this transit-focused scenario only resulted in a transit mode share of approximately 10%, so an increase of 1% region-wide. And this suggests that if your goal is mode shift, you'll need to do more than just improve the transit network. The fourth scenario that we looked at was goods movement. We wanted to decide what the impact of adding dedicated heavy vehicle lanes would be. And so we added truck lanes to some of the major routes, including Anthony Henday Drive, Highway 2, and Yellowhead Trail. And we found that the removal of these trucks from general purpose traffic and provision of their own lanes provided notable benefits for both trucks and general traffic. And this scenario kind of landed in between the business as usual and delayed investment scenarios in terms of operations, despite costing quite a bit less than the business as usual scenario. So it did provide some reasonable returns. And then finally, we looked at a transportation demand management scenario where we asked ourselves, if we try to alter travel behavior using financial incentives and disincentives, how much can we get out of it? And so to do that, we doubled parking charges in the downtown core. We doubled the cost of single occupant travel, such as through congestion charges or tolls. And we halved transit fares to make transit more attractive. And this scenario really had the most dramatic system-wide effects out of all the scenarios, in that it generated really high levels of transit demand, quite a bit beyond what the base 2045 transit network could actually take. And it resulted in better general travel metrics than the business as usual scenario as well. So we believe that this scenario demonstrated, I guess, that incentives and disincentives can be quite powerful in shaping mode behavior, and also that if you have a goal of getting a mode shift in your region, which the Edmonton region does, any infrastructure plan really should have a TDM program along with it, because TDM can be quite a powerful tool to get mode share change and move your region in that direction. And so with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation on best practices and some of the projects we're working on now. And I'll pass it on to Stephen, who will present on the Central Okanagan Regional Transportation Plan project.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Stephen, if we could let me present, I will quickly flip the screen over, and we'll do that and do that. All right, and we should be up now. All right, so I think as everybody knows, this our current situation and not being able to get together is a little bit disappointing. I look down the list of participants and people on this presentation today, and I see a lot of familiar names that would have been nice to have sat down and had some lunch with and catch up with. But I guess on the flip side, I also saw a number of names I recognize from Vancouver and elsewhere that wouldn't otherwise have been able to join us. So I guess there's both pros and cons to doing our presentations and getting together this way. But boy, I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to when we can do this in person again. So decided to take a little bit of time and go through the Central Okanagan Regional Transportation Plan to provide a little bit of context and some examples. We just completed this plan back in the final report got posted in December of this past year, in December 2020. So it's a very fresh project. For those of you who don't know the region, Central Okanagan is in the interior of British Columbia. It's got a regional population of just under 200,000, and our future horizon took it to 280,000. It's centered on Kelowna, probably the area most of you recognize, but it includes West Kelowna, which is a growing and fairly substantive community, Lake Country, Peachland, as well as the West Bank First Nation, the Okanagan Indian Band is in there as well, and the regional district of the Central Okanagan. In this particular project, the organization that was our client was the Sustainable Transportation Partnership of the Central Okanagan. You talk about mouthfuls and acronyms that are tough. That's one that fortunately got shortened to, most people called it stefco. So a little simpler, but it didn't mean a whole lot to most people. But really, it was a partnership of the First Nations, regional district, and municipalities in the region, excluding the Okanagan Indian Band. But WFN was part of that partnership. So a little bit of history on transportation in the Central Okanagan. The first Okanagan Lake Bridge opened in 1958. Before that, really the highway was a dead end at Kelowna. Although you could take a ferry across, it really wasn't much of a highway to the south, and places like what's now the city of West Kelowna really didn't have a lot going on other than some agriculture. And even Kelowna at the time was really a fairly small community. With the opening of the first Okanagan Lake Bridge in 1958, it really did change things, and the transportation changed dramatically in the region. But still sort of the region kind of plodded along until the 1990s. And in the 1990s, the Kelowna and the Central Okanagan region really started to explode. They really did a good job of attracting retirees and surpassed the other cities in the BC interior and became the dominant city in the region. A few things happened in the 90s that really started to change how transportation was viewed. One was the Kelowna Mobility Study in 1994, and then later in the 1990s, the Okanagan Valley Transportation Plan was launched. few things that really started to shape the region and shape transportation in the region were, one, that those studies showed that a west side highway route that had been often suggested, so connecting Vernon and West Kelowna on the west side and skipping around Kelowna, those studies showed that it just wouldn't attract much traffic, something in the order of 4 or 5%, and that was confirmed again through some more recent studies. It introduced a new route called the North End Connector, which is an alternative route. It goes through the middle of Kelowna, but would have been a potential highway route. It's now known as the Central Okanagan Multimodal Corridor, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then really it started the initial discussion of the second crossing of Okanagan Lake, because that would have connected to the North End Connector. Through the 90s and early 2000s, really the focus shifted then to what was then the existing Okanagan Lake Bridge, and the need to replace that bridge because the pontoons were quite literally sinking on that floating bridge. So that led to a new replacement bridge opening in 2008. It replaced a 3-lane bridge with a 5-lane bridge, and probably one of the biggest things is it had a clear navigation span, unlike the old bridge that had a lift span that caused traffic to have to stop on a fairly regular basis. So that took care of some of the issues for some time. Coming a little more recently, the Central Okanagan Planning Study, Phase 1, revisited that second crossing and undertook a broader highway planning in 2017, and that led to the Regional Transportation Plan that is the main focus of this topic. So some of the history is fairly important in terms of understanding where it came from. So I mentioned stefco previously. It was an interesting organization. It's a voluntary partnership. It was originally focused on doing travel demand management and really had no mandate to address roads, highways, transit, any of those things. However, they decided that they wanted to embark on a regional transportation plan that looked at the network and the priorities for the region from the municipal perspective. And I should point out that in the past, the highway network has really driven what's happened through the valley. It's a fairly narrow valley, and the highway is really the dominant piece of it. So the province had a lot of control over what happened, and this is really an opportunity for the municipalities to take back some of that control. It was interesting. We went through a vision and goals process, and a lot of this was actually established long before we got involved. They started into this process back in 2014, put it aside to let the Central Okanagan Planning Study occur, and then revisit it again. To be very honest, the regional vision was one that was a bit of a we're going to be all things to all people vision, probably not the most ambitious vision, but the member municipalities at the time said, this is the first time we've done this, and we think that let's go with something that maybe is not super aspirational or isn't going to stretch us too far, because it is the first time. So, as I said, we have a bit of a vision that's all things to all people. The other lesson learned on this was they probably look back at it now and all agree there were probably too many goals that didn't allow the plan to focus enough. As it turns out, the plan became focused through its own process, but certainly the original goals were probably a few too many. They're good goals, well supported by the public, but probably just a few too many. So nothing all that different about the study approach from any other regional transportation plan. Probably one of the interesting pieces around this particular plan was how the plan was delivered. It was delivered by stefco, so the partnership, but managed by the City of Kelowna. Their staff, really had the most time, the most expertise to deliver. They're the only municipality or member of the stefco partnership that actually has a transportation department. Most of the coordination was done with a planning and technical committee made up of technical staff from the member municipalities, but it also included BC Ministry of Transportation and BC Transit on that committee. There was also a local government advisory board that set the direction, and this was comprised of the mayors, the chief, and the board chair for the regional district, and they provided the overall direction. One of the interesting things was the structure of stefco meant that any presentation, there was no, the local government advisory board was only an advisory board, and so any presentation had to be delivered to every council, which led to a very interesting and maybe a little bit onerous delivery system. So going into the technical analysis, there's a travel demand model originally built for the Central Okanagan Planning Study that was refined and revised a little bit based on the public engagement, which included quite a unique and extensive World Cafe style of engagement event early on in the process. We really saw that there was a desire to look at things like ferries across the lake, public passenger ferries or other ways to connect by ferry. Real big push on wanting LRT, in spite of the size of the region and communities. They really was a desire to see that. So those are things we had to address. In the end, we demonstrated why neither of ferry or LRT were appropriate within the horizon of our study, but we did spend some time addressing that. Fair bit of time spent on corridor prioritization and project identification, and then selection process to then choose the projects that were ultimately included in the plan. We say it was an MAE. I would say that was a loose application of multiple account evaluation. Really, there weren't a lot of choices between projects. That ultimately, once we presented where we wanted to be with the system, the projects started to fall out of them. So there weren't a whole lot of choices, particularly when we started to align with what was regionally significant. So in the end, the overall process became focused on median transit lanes on Highway 97. So it was interesting to that although we were trying to focus away from the highway, the flagship project of the regional plan really came back to focusing again on the highway, and it really came down to making better use of the space on that corridor, through Kelowna. And we were surprised. We got good support from the public on this, and BC Transit and BC Ministry of Transportation were part of this discussion the whole way through. It had other components to it. So the component through Kelowna was seen as a median transitway, so much like 17th Avenue Southeast in Calgary, but also looking at the current bridge is a 5-lane bridge that has one lane, outbound lane from Kelowna, underutilized in the morning. So we looked at creating a reversible lane in the morning for transit only. This is not enough receiving capacity on the Kelowna side for there to be 3 general purpose lanes, but we could get transit into that reversible lane. And then looking at shoulder running on the West Kelowna side, where it is evolving into a freeway standard on Highway 97, including park and ride at select locations in that part of the region. There are another number of other prominent projects, and of course there were lots of connecting routes and that sort of thing, both street network, active transportation, and transit. But some things that really helped support the transit component were some mobility hubs that we recommended, as well as looking at on-demand transit in Lake Country and Peachland, where the traditional fixed route service really wasn't going to serve all of our needs. And then looking at the Okanagan Gateway, which is the area that includes the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and the airport. One very interesting finding we found there was that with the current campus plan at UBCO, it would result in a tripling of the current transit demand over time at the university. So planning for that kind of transit capacity was quite significant, and that was generated by their lack of parking that they're going to be building in the future, and lack of any other way to get to the university, meaning the transit would be the only choice. So really, in many ways, the regional transportation plan has changed the discussion of transportation in the Okanagan. Traditionally, it's been all about the highway, and it's still all about the highway, but transit and active transportation have become the primary topics. And in fact, when we presented the plan to the councils around the region, the various municipal and First Nation and regional district board around the region, it was almost entirely about active transportation. That was probably the biggest issues we had, and general acceptance that transit was the way to deal with things. The other legacy around this is that municipalities and First Nations in the region now have a collective and stronger voice in dealing with the province, and it's led to much better alignment between all of the organizations. I've done a lot of work for the ministry in the past in this region, and there's always a lot of headbutting between the municipalities and the province, and this led to much better alignment in terms of goals and objectives, and I think that will play well for everybody in the Okanagan going forward. And then finally, the stefco has now been dissolved. And recognizing the importance of regional transportation, the function has moved to the Central Okanagan Regional District, and formalizing of a regional committee as well as specific functions around a formalized regional transportation plan. So with that, that concludes our presentation. I guess we probably open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Stephen and Lynn, for your very informative presentations. Do we have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat box right now. If anyone has any question, you can unmute yourself and speak as well. I guess I have a question. So what are some of the difficulties you have encountered for these multi-municipal or bigger transportation planning projects, whether if it's for coordination or the data you have received to coordinate with them? Are there any difficulties?
Sure, I can jump in first. Rarely is the issue around the technical side. Sometimes there are issues with data and each municipality being different, particularly when you have, I'll use the Central Okanagan as an example, where Kelowna had really good data, good database, good traffic counts, and some of the smaller municipalities weren't necessarily at the same level. So there were inconsistencies there, but generally the technical is not the challenge. It really comes down to in any regional process, whether it's transportation or planning, it really comes down to dealing with the different perspectives of the different municipalities and different organizations you deal with, and getting everybody together. And we've probably spent more time on that than we do on analysis or anything else. It's getting everybody on the same page.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from John. He's curious about the technical side of model for Okanagan. For example, how was a ferry choice model collaborated?
Yeah, so we didn't introduce the ferry into the modeling process. Instead, we basically took the cost of even getting something fairly basic, and very quickly the municipality said, okay, yeah, no, we're not interested in that. It was really a cost issue, that no matter, even if we could get good mode share on the ferry, the cost was just too much for this this organization to take on at the time, remembering that they're voluntary organization with no ability to raise funds of their own, except through their own municipal taxation. So they decided to put it aside and defer it, I guess is the best way for a later date, because of the cost.
I have another question from Carrie Fellows. The Florida and Denver examples included great internet interface for the public. Were these developed by the HDR, by the local jurisdiction, or as a collaboration between organizations?
Sure, I'll answer that one. The Florida one, our company actually had no involvement in. We just found it through the best practice research that we were doing for our projects, and thought it was a good example of how a study could be communicated. Specifically, some of the more detailed policies. While the Denver Mobility Choice Blueprint study was an HDR project that we completed a number of years ago, and so I believe we do have a quite good graphics team down in the States out of our Denver office, and they completed that study and most of the associated graphics as well.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question from Peter. He was wondering if self-driving automated vehicles were addressed.
Go ahead, Lynn. I'll jump in with follow-up if necessary.
Sure, I guess, Peter, first, maybe just confirmation, are you referring to the Central Okanagan planning study or one of the other studies?
Well, maybe Lynn, why don't you speak to what we did in GTH, and I can follow up with via Central Okanagan.
Yeah, sure. So in GGH, yes, self-driving vehicles or automated vehicles were looked into quite detailedly. They were included in both the future modeling horizons, but also in more of a, I guess, a desktop planning-based research in terms of what future adoption rates could look like, and then what those adoption rates would look like in terms of future operations and future changes to mode shares. So yes for GGH, and then I'll defer to Stephen for Central Okanagan and EMRB.
Yeah, so maybe just quickly, on GGH, one of the really important things that was looked at was the effect of different regulatory regimes on connected and autonomous vehicles, and how that would change uptake and then change travel behavior throughout the region. We also developed a sketch model. It's a spreadsheet-based model, but our ME modelers were able to come up with something that was able to look at the impacts of connected and automated vehicles throughout the GGH. We haven't yet got to that point in the Edmonton project, but we are going to use that same sketch model to help us with our project prioritization in Edmonton, and really just apply it at as a sort of an adaptability criteria. So as projects are pulled forward, how well can they be adapted to address connected and autonomous vehicles? In the Central Okanagan, there was a separate study done on disruptive mobility that addressed connected and autonomous vehicles more at a very generic and strategic level, and again, mostly around that adaptability component. How well can the network potentially adapt, and where do we need to keep our focus as things move forward in the future?
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any more questions coming in? Yes, we have another one. Is Central Okanagan looking into more comprehensive regional-based sustainable transportation, HSR integration into the traditional mode in the land transportation interactions now or in the near future?
So it's interesting. There's some things happening in the Central Okanagan. There's no interest in high-speed rail, and I think the region is just not quite populous enough. Some of you may know Gordon Lovegrove. He is a professor at UBCO, and he has been promoting a rail-based solution up and down the Okanagan Valley that would actually connect Kamloops to Soyuz ultimately. And certainly some of the planning we've done considers how that could potentially be used. I think he would have preferred to have seen us protect what is the former North End Connector, Central Okanagan Multimodal Corridor. For that, we think that it's probably a little too far out to be protecting that corridor. There are better uses, but then there's other corridors that may be available. But certainly, his ideas and some of the work that UBCO has done on a rail solution for the valley were considered in the plan.
All right. Doesn't look like we have any more questions for you, Lynn and Stephen. Thank you very much for your presentation today. I will just say that we will be leaving this webinar open for another half an hour for everyone who would like to continue networking. So please turn on your webcam and microphone, and we will be able to interact with each other for another half an hour. Thank you again.